When we do storytelling, we always feature the stories of Vietnam vets, but over the years, we've featured the stories of the children of Vietnam vets, writers, songwriters, folks who were engaged in the life of our monument. And what I love about it is that in some ways, what you see here every day of the year in bronze comes to life. I want to tell you a little bit of a story about this monument, and to do so, I want to tell you that in 1993, I met a woman by the name of Diane Carlson-Evans. I was chairing a national conference for women's leaders, and we had invited this person I had read about in Parade magazine to come because she was doing this extraordinary thing. She was advancing this idea of a monument to women at the National Mall, and that in and of itself, anytime you want to put a new monument on the National Mall, it's a big darn deal, but particularly if you wanted to honor women, and women who served in an unpopular war, as civilians, as military women, as people that were offering humanitarian aid. And so we invited Diane to come and be one of our women of influence. Well, she came in a way only a nurse can, accompanied by her friend and fellow Vietnam vet, and Colonel Jane Carson. And when she got there, she said, "I'm afraid I might have blood poisoning." And I said, "What makes you think that?" And she said, "Well, these red bands going up my arm." And I said, "That's a pretty good sign." We were at GW, and I said, "Shall we go immediately to the hospital?" Both of these women are nurses, and they both said, "No, we have a message to deliver." They were fighting the good fight. They went to the hospital. I went with them. I think in that short period of time, she passed out more pins about the Vietnam Women's Memorial and their anticipated, hopeful dedication within the year. And I would forever be linked to Diane Carlson-Evans. When it came time to dedicate this memorial in 1993, on a day very much like this, I had the pleasure of being a volunteer to sort of seat people in and amongst this sort of very same spot. Everyone was here. Men, women, people had served together. And in some ways it was a reunion, but it was also this amazing kind of religious act, if you will, an exorcism. Because in some ways you had to let it out and tell each other, I was there. And to reconnect to the way in which that war had affected you then, and maybe you put it away, and maybe you got to take it out and start to look at it again. So in 1996, on a day very much like this, we started storytelling on November the 11th, 20 years ago. I would come here and sit in the benches prior to that and listen to people sort of make meaning of this. And I think that's really important. I love kids because they'll be like, she's missing something. You know, the young woman who's sort of crestfallen looking down, she's missing something. Or you'd get people that would name them or feel like that's me, or some piece of this would resonate with them, or what people left here. But I decided we needed to tell the stories. So together, over the last 20 years, we've been telling stories. And some of our storytellers come back, and some of them are brave enough to do it once. But it really is the story of the stories that I want to tell you about. When we first started, I work at the University of Maryland, where I've been for the last 34 years. I would borrow some AV equipment from my colleagues, and I would kind of pull up in a car. This is sort of pre-9/11, so not a lot of security. Pull up in a car and unload this crazy equipment. And in this very Radar O'Reilly way, there was a wonderful old medic from Vietnam named Doc Spresser, who somehow or other would sense that my car was going to arrive, and he would be there on the corner right there, and he would say, "I'm here to help you." Every single Memorial and Veterans Day for years, Doc Spresser would be there to help me. And eventually I would sort of get out of him this story of his own journey. Not an easy one, not without pitfalls, and not without health issues that continued to plague him for years, mental, physical, but he was there. And the first time we did it, we didn't even have anything. We just told our stories. Diane Carlson Evans told the story of getting this memorial here, what it meant. Jane Carson, a wonderful woman who had Linda Van Deventer, who had written a book, Home Before Morning. When it first started to set in that women had been in Vietnam, she was here. By then, the aftermath of Agent Orange had affected her lungs. She would not be here the next year. It was important to tell the stories while the people were still here, and then really important to tell the stories so that their children and our children's children could not forget how important their contribution was. So this morning, I used to throw copies of Who Told Stories into a scrapbook that's really not good. Scrapbookers would really revolt at what that looks like. And I would find that there'd be articles that would be published in the Washington Post or Chicago Tribune, or the first time we did storytelling, the front page of the Washington Post the next day was a picture of a woman at this memorial. And I wept when I opened my door and looked at that paper. And how important it was that this sacred space was here. There are 8 trees around this memorial. There are 8 women's names on that memorial. Women who lost their lives, all military women, but military women weren't the only ones serving, weren't the only ones who died. But that's who's honored. But so many other people really were quite extraordinary. So I went through my really crummy scrapbook today, and I want to tell you about just a few folks. Admiral Crowe, chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, an amazing man, and his wife Shirley. I don't think this would be here had it not been for Admiral Crowe, chair of the Joint Chiefs, who said it's the right thing to do. After serving as ambassador to the Court of St. James, Admiral Crowe came back and spoke here at the Wall at a special anniversary. In 2007, Admiral Crowe died. We honored him at storytelling, because we wouldn't be in this space were it not for the brass who made it happen. Jane Carson, Diane Evans, Edie Meeks, women who served as extraordinary nurses, who, if you ask who saw trauma, think about it. Every day you are a healer. Doctors and nurses and medics and helicopter pilots, you're seeing trauma every day. And so if you wonder why your body and your heart and your head react the way they do 10, 15, 20 years later, it's because you saw it every day. And yet so many people would come back year after year to try to find their nurse, their friend. Diane Carlson Evans and Edie Meeks were hooch mates, as they call it. They lived together in Vietnam, and they would work together to make this happen, and for years after, to make sure we never forgot the stories. Urati Kazikis spoke at the first storytelling in 1996. She had been a young journalist. No one believed that a woman, and yet alone a woman journalist, would be in Vietnam. And yet at Tet, she took a bullet to her backside because she needed to tell the story. Urati Kazikis would be really critical in reminding us that there were women and men, but women who served in order to tell the story to the folks at home. And how important that was for that war, because it was the first one many of us watched in our own living rooms. Evangeline Jamison, she served as a head nurse. Korea, World War II, Vietnam. A piece of work. Jamie. She would come here, she looked like your grandmother from the minute you met her. But you also knew that she had this comedic edge to her, this good heart. She always believed that we could do more. She would live for a long, long time. And what I loved about Jamie is that she had this sort of gentle, giant way about her. She would come back often because she needed to be among her people, as she called us. There were Red Cross workers, many of whom saw some of that very same firefight, but also were there to make people feel happy and alive and remember what home was like and remember what games they used to play when they were little kids. Holly Watts would come back again and again and again to tell her story until her body made it harder and harder for her to do that. In the last year, we've watched as one of our favorite storytellers, Emily Strange, who wrote amazing poetry, a Red Cross donut dolly, if ever there was one. Her life ended this year. I am so glad she got to tell her story over and over again. Helen Hagelheimer appeared on the front of the Washington Times. It was the story of a flight attendant, then called a stewardess, in World Airways, who transported troops in and out of Vietnam, and saw men, mostly, some women, going into Vietnam, and then would fly them home. And they weren't exactly the same. War had done its work. You heard something of creativity in this space. When we first started, I just ran into Ed Henry and the Memorial Day Writers Project. I needed to find people who were willing to tell their story, and there were a hell of a lot of Vietnam vets who would not. It took years of saying, come on, won't you please? Or reading an article and then just writing a blind letter to someone and saying, I read about you, are you willing to? And how grateful I was when people would say yes. But Ed Henry and the Memorial Day Writers would come and tell their story and sing their songs and do their poetry, and I could always count on him. Ed came up this morning and I was reminded that life keeps going on. He lost his wife this year. That sense of life progressing, that wound again. I was also reminded of this really extraordinary group of songwriters who've come and participated over the years. You'll hear from John Black in a little bit. There were children of Vietnam veterans, including children whose parents are on the wall. Karen Zacharias was one of those people who would come back again and again to tell what it felt like to lose her dad, to have that military group come to your front door to tell you that your dad wasn't coming home. She would write about it. She would teach other people to write about it. But she wouldn't let go of the story because we needed to know that there was, as we call it now, collateral damage, that families were deeply affected. There was David Chung, a FedEx driver, a Vietnam vet, who would somehow or other convince a bunch of other Vietnam vets who started FedEx that when this monument needed to come from the foundry in Colorado, that what if we created this truck, a special truck that you could roll up the sides, and anywhere we stopped along the way, people could see it. So FedEx, at their own expense, created the truck. And David and his compatriot drove this statue from Colorado. And little miracles happened along the way for people who would probably never get to Washington again to see it, and some who would. There are people like Paula Coughlin and Lorene Otto, young women serving in today's conflicts, trauma nurses, chief trauma nurses, who would come back from Iraq because it was important for Vietnam-era veterans to welcome these young people home and tell them, you're not alone, get the help you need, here's your community of care. I asked my friend Lorene Otto to come and speak. She was just coming home from Iraq. And she said, can I bring a friend, Paula Coughlin, with me? We served together. Paula Coughlin, mother of 4, deployed to Iraq. So I said, absolutely. I'd read a story about Alan Ho. More importantly, I'd read a story about his son, Nainoa. A group had been in Iraq, a young captain named Nainoa, and a Washington Post reporter had been embedded with that group. A young Nainoa Ho was killed in Iraq. His father was a U.S. Army medic in Vietnam. They are from Hawaii. Alan came to tell his story, but also to tell the story of his son, Nainoa. He brought us all leis and beautiful pictures of his son, Nainoa. We were wearing these buttons. When Paula Coughlin and Lorene Otto came, Paula said, "Is that young man that you're wearing, is his last name Ho?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "I was with him when he died." And I said, his dad is here. That's his dad. I think there are little miracles like that happen here. But Paula went up to Alan Ho and they began this conversation. And I think Alan didn't quite want to believe it. But Paula said, "I need to tell you something. I was preparing Nainoa and his body for his men to come in and say goodbye. And I couldn't get his eyes shut. I kept trying to get his eyes shut, and they would not stay shut." And Alan started laughing. And I think she thought he was going into some sort of shock. And he said, "I need to tell you, my son never slept with his eyes shut. When he was a baby, we'd always try to tape him shut and do other kinds of things. And then when he was in the military, his men never knew when he was truly sleeping. They thought the captain was still awake. So the fact his eyes would not go shut let me know he had just gone to sleep." Those two became fast friends. Paula's children and her husband would travel to Hawaii to meet Alan's family. Alan and Paula would do StoryCorps together. Alan would be the feature of an animation that StoryCorps did so that children would know there was a link between what happened in Vietnam and what happened in this conflict, in these conflicts. Not long ago, we celebrated an anniversary, the 20th. There was a man named Doug Moore who came to share his story. And a woman who was here that weekend, Debbie, saw that a guy named Doug Moore was coming. He'd been a helicopter pilot, and she thought, "I wonder if that's my Doug Moore," right? The guy I met in Vietnam, who was just the friendliest, nicest guy. So she decided to come down and take in the story. And indeed, it was her Doug Moore, the guy she had known in Vietnam. And this friendship got reconnected. Well, what's totally cool is that friendship blossomed. Doug and Debbie were married about 18 months later. Debbie will speak today at the ceremony at the wall at 1 o'clock. It'll be another reminder that small miracles happen here often, particularly when you unleash the story. I was reminded this morning as I was sitting here that this place is not the same as it was 20 years ago. It's prettier. The trees are bigger. Right now, the day is beautiful. The sun is out. There have been days when it's been raining, and there's been days when it's been snowing. There are people that were here at the beginning who aren't here anymore. But I like to believe somehow or other we got their stories. And they live on through us. I turned 60 this year, which seems very, very old. But in reality, in my mind, I'm 34. I work at the University of Maryland. And one of the pleasures I have is that I work with young veterans. I take the lessons I learned from my Vietnam-era veteran friends. And I try to make sure this generation of post-9/11 veterans gets what they need in order to succeed as students, as parents, as children of others. So tomorrow, I'll celebrate Veterans Day again with about 500 of my favorite veterans. And in that crowd will be 39 benefactors who over the course of the last 6 years have given us over $3 million to make sure that those veterans had more than just a GI Bill to go to college. And I will be forever grateful. And among them will be Vietnam vets who said, "I wanted to make sure they were going to be okay." I have to tell you, this is where it started for me. It was a gift to be that kid who got asked to join a board because I was a young educator who could help unleash the stories. What a gift for 20 years to keep those stories close. I promise I will make sure we keep telling the stories. Thank you so much for coming every year.